Okay, so it's looking like Congress is revoking the budget cuts that Trump passed last year. So when I first heard this, I was feeling a little skeptical because I really hadn't heard about this going on anywhere. But according to this great article that got posted in the New York Times today, they've broken down the budget cuts and increases that have actually gone into effect in the 2026 budget that Congress enacted. Now, I'm sure if you're watching this channel, you were following closely last year when the Department of Government Efficiency came in and planned to eliminate billions in government waste. Too little avail. RIP Doge. Ugh. I don't like that those words came out of my mouth. So it seems like Congress is getting ready to enact $1.6 trillion in discretionary spending for this upcoming year. This means across the board, they are leaving intact budgets from previous year relating to education, housing, healthcare, and research studies. All things the White House tried to slash or eliminate in the past year. And this $1.6 trillion number is important because of how similar it is to previous years. Now, this chart that they attached with the article, I think does a great job at painting a picture of the gap between what the White House wanted and what they got. I think a great example from this chart is the proposed requested cut to the housing and urban development. The White House requested a 44% cut, and yet Congress enacted a 9% budget increase. The cumulative total of all of the cuts in the proposed White House budget total about $163 billion. And they just didn't get it. Now, even though this budget is in place, it doesn't directly undo some of the damage that was done in this last year, namely the mass firing of government officials and employees. Now, at this point, you may be asking, as I was, why would Republicans do this? I mean, they're all about spending cuts, right? Well, the fact of the matter and the prevailing power in this situation is the fact that these Republicans are up for re-election this year. It's why, despite, according to this budget, a lot of congressional Republicans support budgets as they aren't exactly putting up a huge fight to the president trying to use potentially illegal maneuvers to exert more executive power over these agencies and unilaterally cut funding at the executive level. But when it comes time to vote, these Republicans don't want these cuts on their record. They understand that these aren't popular cuts. Now, it should be noted that these numbers aren't coming from one set budget bill. The government has been trucking along step by step with multiple appropriations bills, sort of short-term continuing resolutions to keep the budget intact over time. So these numbers for 2026 that Congress has enacted are the accumulation of 11 appropriations bills that the government has been using to keep things afloat, most of the time, minus the shutdowns. Now, if you're looking at this chart closely, there is a huge part of the budget that you're not seeing here. These numbers are focusing on domestic spending, but the military budget is an entirely different thing. The president has been pushing for an increased military budget, and he has gotten some of that through different bills funding the military. And some of it he got through the tax bill earlier this year on a partisan basis. Those gains came in part by cutting Medicaid and food stamps. Now, this isn't to say that everything the president has requested has been denied by Congress. The prime example I would use are the NPR cuts that Congress approved a couple months ago. That was requested by the president and rubber stamped by Congress. And it's been causing several NPR associated channels to shut down. I love this quote in the New York Times article about this. They are interviewing Mark Goldwein, who is a supporter of deficit reduction. And he goes on record here saying that the White House did manage to ward off perennial spending increases for domestic programs, which still amounted to, quote, a big victory. Sure. Now, another aspect of this that you might be remembering is the Education Department. Last spring, the administration took its first steps to try and dismantle the program without approval from Congress. They started freezing funds and reallocating staff to different departments and firing other members of the staff within the department. Yet in late January of this year, Democrats and Republicans in Congress allocated $79 billion to the department, which was a slight increase over 2025. They also completely disregarded the White House request to cut funding to Pell Grants, which was another big part of this Education Department reform. Yet when asked about this, White House officials still believe that they can dissolve the department eventually, as this budget from Congress didn't explicitly say they couldn't. Air Bud rules for dismantling the Department of Education. Other big targets of the president were NASA and the National Institute of Health. The president was hoping to cut their budgets by roughly $40 billion. Again, and this is the theme of the day, Congress said no and kept those budgets flat. Oh, and the National Science Foundation, too. They were a huge target of the president and the White House in the first year. If you remember the Department of Government Efficiency and Elon Musk pulling out weird experiments being funded by this department, the White House was advocating for over a 50% cut to the budget of this program. This would mean cutting cancer research amongst a lot of other very important research. But at the end of the day, there was bipartisan compromise by both sides of the aisle in Congress to only slash the department's budget by 4%, which is a huge deal. And I think we should be talking about this more. Tied into that in that appropriations bill is a provision that should prevent the president from holding up future research funds as he did in the first year. It really does feel like Congress is sort of tepidly trying to reassert its power over the president and sort of take some of that constitutional obligation back for itself. So with Congress doing what it's doing here, the question then goes to the courts. There are still hundreds of unresolved lawsuits as of the time of recording, basically asking if some of the funding freezes that the administration has tried to enact for congressionally approved funds are constitutional, if it's legal for the executive to freeze that money. We'll have to see, but Congress has made its position pretty clear here. I think pretty clearly you can see the latest example of this happening was a few weeks ago when the administration tried to freeze $600 million in allocated government funds to blue states. Now, a judge has stopped the administration from going through with this freezing, and we'll have to see where things go from here. You can go watch one of my more recent videos, but we went over the fact that nearly 90% of the president's lawsuits, at least in the Environmental Policy Department, have been rejected by the courts. And we'll have to see if that applies here too. I do wonder as we get closer to the midterms if we're going to see Democrats and Republicans talking about this more. These spending cuts have not been popular with the American public. And if members of Congress on both sides of the aisle can claim that they did this to prevent the president from enacting some of these cuts, that could be a big deal. And maybe it's a bipartisan thing, you know? Maybe both sides are touting the fact that they did this. Or maybe not. Maybe we'll see Republicans more quiet on it. But it's a good thing to pay attention to. Anyway, if you found this video at all interesting, join the channel below. We're trying to tackle complex topics like this, stories that we think are important, and we're trying to normalize dissecting these stories to get to the truth at the heart of these issues. So yeah, I'll see you all tomorrow.